Hello and welcome back to our series of studies on the great 19th century Christian Lutheran philosopher theologian Soren Kierkegaard, who lived in Denmark between the years of 1513 and I have Luther on the mind. No, it was actually 1813 and 1855. He died at the age of 42 years old, and we're studying his works, his aesthetic and philosophical works, and this is the 17th study, believe it or not. And each of these studies are 30 minutes long, because that's pretty much the limit of my bandwidth in uploading to YouTube. So we decided to pretty much compress it in settle with 30-minute studies. This is number 17, and I think we're going to have maybe 40 or 50 studies by the time this is all done. The studies we're doing are based on my book that I wrote and was published in 2009, called Soren Kierkegaard, Night of Infinite Resignation. You can buy this book on Amazon.com. Just go to Amazon.com and put in my name, Ross M. Bond, and it'll come up. You can buy it. It's going right now for $19.99. You can actually buy it directly from me if you send me an email at Ross, R-O-S-S, at Ynet, W-Y-N-E-T.net. And I'll sell it to you without any shipping charges for $16. Well, okay, so we are now in the postscript. We're in the postscript of the SK, called the concluding unscientific postscript to the philosophical fragments. And we are really analyzing the whole epistemology of Christianity and the relationship between reason and faith. And we're into book 2 of the postscript, in which we're analyzing the subjective problem or the subjective issue. And in our prior lesson, we were looking at how much SK admired and how much Lessing, the German philosopher Lessing, contributed to SK's whole philosophy. So we went through 3 things, and now we're going into the 4th. If you want to review the other things, and you have to go back to my prior 16 SK 16 study. The 4th thing that SK, in the words of Johannes Climacus, credits Lessing with is this, the 4th thing. Lessing has said that if God held all truth in his left hand, and in his right hand held the lifelong pursuit of the truth, he would choose the right hand. In other words, we're continuing here with this insight that truth is not a result. It's not a system. It's Hegel thought or Marx thought, but it's a way. And in this life, it's an infinite way that we never completely achieve. And this statement serves as a direct refutation of Hegel's system and all existential systems in general, because a system actually absolutely requires finality. System and finality are pretty much one and the same, so much so that if the system is not finished, there is no system. And I've loved these insights from SK on logic, systems, and so forth, because when you think about it, and one of the great logical systems I like to bring up is a chess game. A chess game has a beginning and ending, and a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's a logical system. It's a very incredibly complicated logical system, but it is a logical system. But if you say that the system isn't finished, there's no end game, then you don't have a logical system. So in the same way, this is what Johannes Climacus is saying about a system of existence. It doesn't exist unless it's finished, and only God knows what the end game is, and therefore for no human being is it a logical system. Now, this is just common sense, and that's why SK was such a great, just common sense philosopher. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to explain this. It doesn't take a philosopher. It's just commonsensical understanding of the becoming and the nature of all systems, regardless if it's an existential system or it is a logical system, like a syllogism, a Venn diagram. You have to have an end. If you don't know what the end is, there is no logical system. So this is one of the great things that SK, in this case, in the pseudonym Johannes Climacus, likes to make fun of. So this leads Johannes Climacus into an analysis of two possible theses. A logical system is possible, an existential system is impossible. To wit, in the construction of a logical system, it is necessary first and foremost to make sure not to include anything in it which is subject to existential dialectic. Whatever is incorporated into a logical system must be indifferent to existence, although it draws its concepts from existence. And then places them into the mode of abstract thought. Kierkegaard distinguishes logic from the pure objectivity found in mathematics, which is based solely on the abstract, and he concludes, a stricter judgment would be possible on this point if it were determined in what sense the categories constitute an abridgment of existence, whether logical thought is abstract after existence or abstract without any relation to existence. Now, that opens up a whole world of thought in Western philosophy, as everyone who has studied Western philosophy knows. There's this whole debate about universals and particulars going way back to Plato, Aristotle, and the other suspects in Greek philosophy. As to the relationship between universals and particulars. Now, SK really, unfortunately to me, avoids this issue, and I wish he really got into it a lot more, but he saw the whole problem of universals and particulars, beginning with Plato, in a different way, because he saw existence as Heraclitus did, in the Greek, philosopher everyone knows, who said that all things are in process of becoming. So this was really the bigger problem for SK, and this whole relationship between universals and particulars was not a major concern to SK, because he observed, well, yes, of course, there is this issue, but it doesn't matter that much, because whatever the answer is, existence, as Heraclitus said, is always in process of becoming, a process of change. So however you want to construct a model, tomorrow it may be wrong. You can construct a model of evolution, for example, and it could be completely logical in every way and completely include all universals. But tomorrow we may find out that it's wrong. So that's a problem with empiricism, and that SK saw in Johannes Climacus. And that's why actually SK really did not go into that issue so much. I wish he had. I mean, I think it would be very interesting, but he did not see the main problem that way. Now, another thing is, it is necessary that the dialectic of the beginning of a logical system be made clear. Here, once again, SK pokes a great deal of fun at the beginning of the Hegelian system, and I always love this because it's a whole problem that began with Descartes in so-called modern philosophy in the 19th century, that de omnibus dubitandum est, you have to doubt everything to begin. And as SK loved to point out, well, if you doubt everything, you have nothing to begin with, so you can't begin. You have to have something. No matter what it is, you have to have something to begin with. And this was always a funny observation that SK liked to use. And he compared that with Greek philosophy. In Greek philosophy, as Aristotle said, you begin with wonder. You begin with the wonder of a question that might or may not be true. You don't begin with nothing. You don't begin de omnibus dubitandum est. You begin with something. You begin with, and that's the whole part of the existential philosophy, is that you do begin with something, whatever it is. Maybe I stubbed my toe this morning. Well, what is that? I mean, and what significance does that have? But it's something. It's not nothing. It's not de omnibus dubitandum est. Well, it's funny. The problem, as SK always points out, is that also, in respect to this, reason is infinitely reflective. In other words, there is no point. If you want to begin with de omnibus dubitandum est, you have to reflect forever, because there is no point at which you can begin except via a leap. You have to begin by a leap. Reason is infinitely reflective. It cannot stop except when you decide to stop. It has to stop via a leap. I can reflect and reflect and reflect forever, but I can't stop reflecting unless I come to a leap. And I decide, okay, it's the leap. And ultimately, the Christian truth is a leap of faith. So, furthermore, the more reflection without coming to a decision, the more objective and the less subjective one becomes. Here is how Climacus describes it. Let me dwell a little bit more upon this point. When the subject does not put an end to his reflection, he is made infinite in reflection, i.e., he does not arrive at a decision, and so running wild in his reflection, the individual becomes essentially objective and loses more and more the decisiveness that inheres in subjectivity. And that's the perfect example of people who can't make up their minds, like Hamlet. Hamlet could not make up his mind, although I disagree with that a little bit, but that's a whole different topic. So if we get into the next section, Johannes Climacus analyzes the thesis that an existential system is impossible. Only for God is existence or reality, that is all that comes into being, a system. But it cannot be a system for any existing person. System and finality correspond to each other in such a way that one cannot have one without the other. Existence, however, separates the moments of thought and the moments of existing, so that the thinker abstracts from existence in the moment of his thought and then returns to the existential in order to exist again. So here he points out the difference between existing and thinking. I exist, and then when I start to think, then I step outside of my existing and turn my thinking into an eternal reality that doesn't change. It's a system that I think of, a logical system. It could be a syllogism, a Sorites, or a Venn diagram. But after I think this, then I have to go back to existing. So we go back and forth, back and forth. There is no continuity between the existing and thinking. So therefore, existence separates being and thought. Thought perceives the objective thus becomes a thought. A person labors away from his subjectivity and his knowledge by becoming so immersed in the objective thought that it becomes to signify that for himself he is the objective thought instead of a subjective thinker who only thinks the subjective thought by virtue of a tautology. So here we have his criticism of those people who get immersed in the objective reality of everything and forget that they are human beings. They get so immersed in history, for example, they forget that they too exist. And it's absent-mindedness of the professor, if you want to call it that, whatever you want to call it. It's this immersion and obsession about objective reality and the forgetting of one's own personal inwardness and relationship to God through inwardness. So the systematic idea in Hegel, for example, is the identity of subject and object, the unity of thought and being. Existence, on the other hand, is their separation. I think, I exist, I think, and then I exist, back and forth. It does not by any means follow that existence is thoughtless, but it has brought about and brings about a separation between subject and object, thought and being. In the objective sense, thought is understood as a pure thought. This corresponds to an equally abstract objective sense to its object, which object is therefore the thought itself, and the truth becomes the correspondence of thought with itself. This objective thought has no relationship to the existing subject, and while we are always confronted with the difficult question of how the existing subject slips into the subjectivity, where subjectivity is merely pure abstract subjectivity, which again is an objective determination not signifying any existing human being, it is certain that the existing subjectivity tends more and more to evaporate. And finally, if it is possible for a human being to become anything of the sort, and it is merely something of which at most he becomes aware through the imagination, he becomes the pure abstract conscious participation in the knowledge of this pure relationship between thought and being, this pure identity, I, this tautology, because this being which is ascribed to the thinker does not signify that he is, but only that he is engaged in thinking. So here we have the an analysis by SK of the uh, passion, the obsession with the objective thought, in which he thinks like Hegel. Hegel was always his uh, prototype of this sort of thinker, that he becomes so obsessed with the objective that he creates a world, a tautology, a delusional um, construction of what existence really is in his mind, and becomes the identity of thought and being. But in the end, it's just a tautology. It's just a delusional recreation of what existence really is. And that's where the ideas in Hegel came up with the pure identity, pure thought, abstract thinking that has no relationship to existence except as a tautology of what existence really is. In other words, since existence separates subject and object, the only way for there to be a so-called identity of thought must transfer objective reality into the realm of thought and recreate it as a sort of model of what the thinker imagines the objective reality to be. Therefore, it becomes the identity of thought with itself. And the thinker who becomes more and more absorbed in this objective reality that he envisions becomes less and less subjective. So now we go into a further analysis of SK's subjective thinking. Part 2 of the second book deals with the issue of how the subjectivity of the individual must be qualified in order that the problem may exist for him. All true decisiveness inheres in subjectivity. It is commonly assumed that there is not great skill in becoming subjective. Simply being a subjective being seems so simple, and yet the Bible itself, as I remark, says that he who conquers himself is greater than he who takes a city, and this is in Proverbs 16:32. The seeming insignificance of being a subjective individual makes the tasks immensely more difficult, simply because the task itself is not directly alluring so as to provide a motivation for the aspiring individual. The simple subjective tasks of life seem so trivial with what the great accomplishments that bring fame and fortune, and yet for God the simple tasks of life that he has given every man are infinitely important. The tendency of philosophy, on the other hand, is to dwell upon the objective and the speculative, that is, on subjects like history and nature. Christianity, on the other hand, teaches the way to subjectivity, inwardness in existing, emphasizing passion, i.e., subjects like remorse, repentance, and belief. Faith is the highest subjective passion of human existence, and for the objective thinker, on the other hand, the objective tendency, which proposes to make everyone an observer in its maximum, to transform into an objective observer, that he becomes almost a ghost. He emphasizes the objective at the expense of the subjective, and becomes almost a ghost, scarcely to be distinguished from the tremendous spirit of the historical past. This tendency naturally refuses to know or listen to anything except what stands in relation to himself. To emphasize this point, Johannes Climacus poses the following question. What conclusion would inevitably be forced upon ethics if becoming a subject were not the highest task confronting a human being? And to what conclusion would ethics be forced? It would, of course, be driven to despair. Hegel is consistent enough not to conclude an ethic in his systematic scheme. There is no ethic in Hegelian thought, in Marx's dialectical materialism. It's just this radical materialism in dialectical materialism, which is a naked predestinarian idea without even a spirit. A very cruel, very hopeless understanding of existence. So the first comparison in the realm of objective thought that Johannes Climacus gives is the historical, and how an unholy alliance with it can be dangerous diversion from the ethical, either through an absent-minded absorption in the study of the historical, or to be tempted by the desire to become world historical. Both of these diversions lead to what is, from an ethical point of view, accidental. How then does an individual acquire historical significance? By means of what, from the ethical point of view, is accidental. But ethics regards as unethical the transition by which an individual renounces the ethical quality in order to try his fortune, longingly, wishingly, and so forth, in the quantitative and non-ethical. The historical person, the person who wants to make great fame and fortune in the world, really misses the point of existence in the ethical, and wastes, in many cases, most cases, wastes his time. And St. Paul said the same thing. Whoever wishes to be rich, famous, and so forth brings a lot of worry, problems, and consternations, and unhappiness upon himself, because he has lost the point of existing in the ethical and in the religious. So we have, what, I think 2 minutes to go. The world historical is quite simply subject to the dialectics of the accidental, both into an assiduous study of history and in the attempt to acquire world historic significance, where the mere winds of fate determine one's destiny. So if you put your hope on that, and this is what you want to lead your life in, you're almost certainly going to be disappointed. You want to be famous, you want to be rich, These are accidental things that come through history, and you're losing your soul if these are the primary things and loves in your life. So we've got about a minute now to go. So if you want to study history, for example, and we go back to the objective thinker, the material of history is practically endless. I mean, there's no end to it. So you have to, in some way, put a limit on it, whether the example of the actions of a king are more important than the actions of the king's lowliest advisor. It's anyone's guess. God knows it, but man does not know. Whether what happened by the most carefully crafted plan of a king devised, or whether the most insignificant event that happened by pure chance is more important, is once again subject to pure speculation. God knows, but man can only speculate. So here we're going to have to wrap up. I only have 10 more seconds. We're going to continue in this analysis of the subjective thinker in the next lesson, and I hope you will join us. Bye.